All right, hey, welcome everybody back to another Microdose with Men Talking Mindfulness. So happy you're here. We're getting closer at this time right now as I'm recording, getting a little closer to the new year, 2024. So let's talk about the self. You know, we always hear this quote or we hear this phrase, know thyself. And what is it about this self? Why do we need to know ourselves? Why is it so important? Like, what's important about the self? What is this self? What does it look like? Well, here's some wisdom to encourage you to access and really work to being that self and getting to discover that self and getting to know yourself and practicing continually to be with yourself. Socrates says, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Lao Tzu says, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Lao Tzu goes on again. He goes, at the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are and you know what you want. That's Lao Tzu again. And Rumi, who I really love, it just says things so beautifully. He says, you have no need to travel anywhere. Journey within yourself. Enter a mine of rubies and bathe yourself in the splendor of your own light. And Rilke, who is one of my favorites, if you never read Journey of a Young Poet, I really suggest highly picking up that book by Rainier Marie Rilke. He says, the only journey is the journey within. So what is this all about? Well, look, you're here and you're listening to this show because you know that change is possible. You know, maybe you're feeling stuck, you feel frustrated with some of your results, or you want to learn what is getting in the way, or you want to gain some new skills or sharpen the ones you already have, or you want to create a new healthy habits that support your ambitions and foster the change you seek. And none of this is possible nor sustainable without being aware of how you do things, how you show up, or, you know, what's your emotional intelligence, what's going on in the emotional realm. Without this awareness, you are blind to who you are and why you do what you do. And we start to run when we're blind and we're kind of ignorant to our self-awareness. We run on autopilot and we're basically a byproduct of our habits. So why is becoming self-aware so essential to growth, your change and your transformation? Well, without awareness or becoming mindful, nothing changes. Therefore, you can continually sabotage yourself. It's our habits that make us or break us. It's our habits that drive more of the same thinking and bring forth the same feelings and produce the same results. We often get caught in this loop, of thinking, feeling, and acting. And we just keep going back, thinking, feeling, and acting on those feelings. And then as those triggers, right, the STIA process, a stimulus, thought, emotion, action. So every time that same stimulus shows up, whether it's a person in your life, whether that's an environment that you're living in, whether it's whatever else is going on that's triggering you, or can potentially trigger you, because you have a choice whether you react to a trigger or not and continually express the same emotions and yield the same actions and therefore yield the same results, things can change. And how do we change? By knowing thyself. So, what's getting in the way? Well, one big thing that's getting in the way and continually is going to get in the way, and it's something that's always going to be there, but you can definitely lessen the power, lessen the voice, lessen the influence on you, is the ego. And, Freud goes deep into the ego and what the ego is all about and what it looks like. And what I'll explain as the ego is like it's its own entity within you that you're constantly kind of grappling with. Like, this is like the mind and the mind and its incredible, insatiable desire of it just wants more. Oh, it's never happy, never enough. And if you're wrapped up in the mind and continually, heeding to the will of the mind and the want of the mind all the time, then you have no time for the self, because your self is literally hijacked emotionally and behaviorally to do the bidding of the mind. So this is something that's going to always come up for you as you continually practice, is getting to know your mind. That's also trying to get to know your full self. So let's talk about what the self is, what it looks like. And one thing that really inspired me to dive in deeper to this self-wisdom, and not just the wisdom that comes from the self, as these wonderful sages that I quoted earlier spoke of, but I'm talking about the self from a more of an analytical point of view, And they talk about in every tradition, like, getting to know the self and, being with the self and how to practice to get to know the self and uncovering the layers to get to the self, layers of programming, the layers of bullshit, the layers of all the stuff that gets in the way of the true spirit and the true self that's inside you. But we had Frank Anderson on this season of Men Talking Mindfulness. And he works with this particular therapeutic module called IFS, Internal Family System. And they break down the self into 8 C's, the 8 C's of the self. And they are calm, connected, curious, creative, confident, courageous, compassionate, and I'm forgetting one. So we'll get to it in a second here. I have my notes in front of me, but I always try to challenge myself to get those all 8. But so here's the thing about which I love the way that Richard Schwartz and Frank Anderson. Richard Schwartz is the founder of IFS therapy, internally family systems. He breaks down the self in this way. And so you get to know the self right by practicing, and I'll talk about what those 8 elements and what those 8 C's are in a moment. But when you get to the self and you practice to get to the self and you get to know thyself, then you can experience something that they call self-energy. And when you have this self-energy, you're literally lighting yourself up from the inside out, and you're actually kind of living in the vibration of the self instead of being, living the vibration of someone else and how they're programming and how you should be doing things, how you should be showing up, the things you should be buying, the things you should be thinking, the things you should be doing, how you should be presenting yourself to the world instead of being authentically the self that you are. So when you get to that self-energy, right, that lights you up on the inside because you're really being yourself, then you can experience self-leadership. And when you experience that self-leadership, that's when we really start to be our best selves, and we really begin to live in harmony with who we are, the energy that's inside of us, and how we can bring that energy into the world to help other people. So the first C is calm. And this is, for me, as I'm understanding the self, this is the first kind of key, if you will, that unlocks the door to the other aspects of the self. Because if you're not calm, then you're hijacked emotionally. You're out of that executive function, which is that amazing part of our brain that allows us to be the brilliant human being that we can be if we are calm. We're out of that sympathetic nervous system. When we're calm, we're into that parasympathetic nervous system. And calm, cool, and connected, serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, all these wonderful hormones are online and helping us to experience more of that self and the self energy. So if you can't get the calm, what's getting in the way of you being calm? What is agitating you? Who is agitating you? Do you take time during the day to slow down, to get calm, to relax the mind and the body? Without calm, none of this works. You're never going to get to the self. The next is like when we get to, and there's no real particular order here. I'm just going to kind of roll through this and kind of link all these up as we move through. So we get calm, then we can get connected, right? Connected to what's meaningful. And what's really meaningful is not the mind, not its emotions, not what everyone else thinks we should do or who we should be, but we're connected to our heart. We're connected to the essence of our being, but we're also connected more genuinely to the planet. We're more connected more genuinely to other people as well. So we really feel a sense of connected to something more meaningful than just, buying the next thing that is on your list, or, showing up at work and not really giving a crap about it. That's just living in a perpetual state of disconnected. So my questions to you is like, what are you connecting to that are meaningful? What are you connecting to that are meaningless, that is keeping you disconnected? Where we spend our time, right? It says a lot about who we are. So if you're spending time with things that you really love and enjoy, that light you up on the inside, that speak to your heart, that, serve and help other people, not just yourself, then you're in a truly connected state, and that's going to help you to bring that self online. And then we have clarity, right? So when we get calm, we get clear. We get calm, we get connected. Then we begin to discover this clarity, and I like the term. A lot of us live in, or maybe we do momentarily, or maybe we do for half a day, a couple days. We can live in something called the fog of distress, right? And that fog of distress, just like a fog sits over top of a mountain, or kind of drops into a valley, like we really can't see more than a couple feet in front of us. So we're kind of like continually lost in this fog, and the distress part is like we're lost in those stories, we're lost in those feelings, we keep exacerbating those thoughts and those feelings because we keep doing the same things, and therefore we keep experiencing the same thoughts, the same feelings, and we keep moving through the same actions. So that clarity is really, really important because it allows us to pull out above that fog of distress. It allows us to get away from that hijacking of the amygdala and getting into that lower survival mode self. I probably shouldn't use the S word there to describe that self, or the kind of our lower primate way of being, I guess, is a way, or just a very reactive and not thoughtful person at all, or heartfelt person at all. We're just reacting and being triggered by absolutely everything that's around us. And I'm sure there's times in your life where you know that you're lacking that clarity. But then also what's happened when you discover and experience that clarity, what's possible. Can you move beyond your feelings and your thinking to get to that clarity? Do you know what life is outside the fog of distress? And if you don't, or this is like very foreign to you, what I'm saying, then, God, like jump in and start practicing. Jump in, attach to us, like give me a call. I'd love to help you release from that fog of distress and experience that clarity, because it's very inspiring. Because think of what in spirit is. What does inspiration mean? Right? Well, think about information, right? When you hear information, you're in form, right? So you're constantly dealing with things. Right, whatever those things are, we have to deal with things all day, and that's not a good or a bad thing. It's just life. It's life in a physical world. There's things that are around us that we need to manage. With things we need to manipulate. Things we need to do with the things that are in our lives, because again, we live in this physical world, but we're in spirit. Right? And spirit, you can think of as energy. We're inspired, right? And we're inside of ourselves instead of being outside and in form. And that's what clarity can do for you. It can really help you light up on the inside. And I'm sure everyone at one time in their lives, or maybe you're inspired right now, but when you're inspired, you're kind of driven by something that has a deeper meaning than just financial reward, or, receiving accolades, or, any kind of, BS social validation that you're seeking, or something like that. Right. So get to clarity. And we can get into also experience this curiosity, and just think about curiosity. And that's really a big tenet of mindfulness, is being curious and remaining curious. And curious does not mean judgmental. It does not mean, criticizing or slicing and dicing and kind of dividing up the world into different forms, right? But being curious from an objective and kind of a very, high level point of view, and kind of looking things and how they move, how they act, how they sound, how they work together, and just like, curiosity. Think about what that means to you. And when you are curious about something, what does it do to your relationship to that thing, or that maybe that's something when you get curious about, a particular thought, or you get curious about a pattern of behavior, right? You can look at it from this objective view and begin to see it in a new way that might help you move beyond something that is keeping you stuck, or something that is causing you this distress. Curiosity, so important. And that's another C of the self. And we have 4 down. We have 4 more to go. And another one is creativity. And this is us at our essence, creativity. Without the ability to create, we would not have this world that we live in now, period. And maybe you're not used to living in your creativity and utilizing your creativity on an ongoing basis. Maybe you've been, kind of shamed because of you have a desire to be creative or be artistic in some way, and you had that taken away from you at a very young age. I get it. I grew up in a very athletic-driven family. I was fortunate to be athletic as a kid and be able to do a lot of amazing things in my body, and that's kind of the route I went all the way through college. Living in the, I guess the creativity of my athleticism, because people really liked watching me play or watching me do things, because apparently I did things really well, and it was fun. I had a lot of fun playing as well. But I was never really, given a paintbrush. I was never, giving, any other kind of creative tools and asked to really explore myself creatively. Plus I was receiving so many rewards from just being an athlete, that it was just an easier path for me to be an athlete instead of being an artist or being, a creative in some ways. And not like every creative is an artist or every artist has to be, every artist is creative. But creativity, it's at our essence. It's just who we are. It's how, again, we've made this world that we're in. So if we have access to that creativity, then we start to find solutions to problems that we may have even thought of before. We begin to see and seek things in a new way and begin to kind of manipulate and mend the world in a way that is inspiring and new. And so creativity just has so many wonderful benefits. And if you're not accessing your creativity on an ongoing basis, whatever that is, like maybe you just start playing music every day a little bit, or maybe you draw a little bit every day, or maybe you just go take in some art. You can even passively, be inspired creatively by, going to a museum, or maybe you want to make some music or something like that. Like creativity is really, really, really powerful and very, very inspiring. So, do you feel like you're accessing and experiencing your creativity on a regular basis? Are you trying new things or taking chances that are going to require you to be humbled and creative as well? Is there a connection to your creativity? I mean, some people don't even have a connection to that. Like, I think certain people, very close family members to me, like, I don't know if they've ever really turned on the light of creativity, or maybe they haven't done it for a number of years or a couple of decades. So cannot stress accessing, being, and playing in the creative realm as often as long as possible. Then we have confidence. We're going on to number 6 here. So confidence, what is confidence? Confidence is the desire to kind of stand up for yourself, to get to you just get to, when you know thyself, you naturally begin to become more confident, raise in that confidence, because, you realize that there's really nothing to be afraid of. It's really, so much of it is just a story of the mind. So much of it comes back to that programming that, you've been living with for a very, probably too long of a time. And then when you start to, here's a story about, being scared and what fear can do, and how fear, that's the opposite of confidence is fear. I lived in Pennsylvania until I was about 25, and I worked in this factory through college just to kind of make some money to go back to school, so I didn't have to work at school or whatever, and just can study and and play basketball and have fun and not worrying about like picking up a couple extra bucks just to kind of feed myself a little bit. So I used to work at Stroman's Bakery, and I worked at a lot of blue collar guys, and they're really, great people. They had families. They kind of, they lived, in the same town. And I remember them telling me I think I was looking to go to Philadelphia, or I was talking about Philadelphia, or someone else talking about Philadelphia, which is like, pretty big city. And the one guy says to me, he's like, every time I go to Philadelphia, I take my gun. And I was like, what do you mean you take your gun to Philadelphia. He's like, well, it's really dangerous up there. It's like, you got to take your gun with you. I'm like, oh my God. It's like, holy cow. Like, I didn't realize that Philadelphia was so bad that I would need a gun to go there. Fast forward like a couple years later, I had a girlfriend that lived in Marlton, New Jersey, on the other side, outside of Philadelphia. And this is before like GPS and, Google Maps and stuff like that. So you had to write everything down and had to kind of know where you're going. And when you're going into an area that's like uncharted territory, you've never been there before, and you're driving alone and you have like no navigator next to you, you really got to pay attention. And and the one time these signs kind of got confusing and I got off the wrong exit and I ended up in downtown Philadelphia. And I was scared shitless because of what this guy was saying about like, oh my God, I take my gun when I go to Philadelphia. So I'm driving around and I'm down on the waterfront actually, which is actually a really good part of town. I remember pulling into this parking lot and asking this parking attendant how to get back to the Betsy Ross Bridge. And as I'm, as soon as I pulled off the bridge, my heart rate went up probably like 140, 150. I was shaking. I was having like, a kind of a near panic attack, I guess you could say. And I remember talking to this parking attendant and shaking and really being nervous that, I was in a really bad part of town and something bad was going to happen to me. And he's like, hey, just go up to, I think it was, Market and 5th Street and then make a right and it'll take you right to Betsy Ross Bridge and you're on your way. And I kind of drove and did what he told me, and I was still really nervous and kind of rolling my windows up and, not, just being ignorant. And, I went across the bridge and everything was fine. And I kind of had that experience. And then, a year later, I ended up living in Philadelphia and actually, start working and getting to know the area that I kind of took that wrong turn a couple of years earlier and ended up in Penn's Landing, right in New York, in Philadelphia. If you know Philadelphia, it's a very good part of town. So this fear was just like, it just completely shook me. And it just completely sabotaged my confidence and just, I was just really lost in fear. And it was just such an incredible experience to just be lost in somebody else's fear instead of really being, just getting to know myself and really being okay with what is. I mean, I could be smart out there. Like I live in New York City now and you don't walk in certain part of town in New York City at certain times of day. It's just not smart. I mean, that's why they call it street smarts. Because certain streets you don't want to go down, no matter how smart you are, something bad might happen. But smart people just don't go down those streets or don't go into those neighborhoods when when it's not time to do so, or you're able to develop so much confidence, right, in myself that I can work my way out of any situation. Basically anything I feel I can do, because now I've I have this confidence that I've developed through all the mindfulness practices I've done over all the years, and everything, all the work that I've done, all the stuff that I've done that continually challenge myself and eradicate more and more of the layers of fear and kind of bullshit that I've been programmed with over the years, and really just trying to see what I'm made of physically, mentally, emotionally, in relationships, what I can do in business. And my confidence just stays really high, and it keeps getting a little stronger all the time. And with that confidence, with that stronger sense of confidence, comes a wonderful sense of humility, because the more that I gain more wisdom, the overall wisdom is like, there's so much I don't know, and so there's so much I can learn, and there's so much I'm curious about, and that just lights up more of the self. And then courage comes as well. Courage is part of this self. And, courage comes from the French and Latin root for the word cur, which means heart. So when you're being courageous, it's a heartfelt experience. And, what are you doing when you are courageous? Like, you're taking risks, you're trying new things, you're kind of bucking the status quo and stepping up and doing the best you can. With whatever you're doing, and willing to take those risks and take another step forward and just get uncomfortable. Like that's a big one. Just get uncomfortable and see what that's like for a while. and stay in that comfortableness for a longer period of time, and then see what the mind does, see what the emotions do, see how they're going to try to take you out of that out of that state, and then try to change the game for you. But what if you stay longer? What if you access more of that courage? What if you take more of that risk? See what happens. Not being an idiot, not being stupid, not doing things that are going to harm you in some way. But being smart about it, but also willing to take that risk, willing to put yourself out there, willing, also that knowledge, that self, that confidence that's going to come online with the self is like, yes, I can, instead of no, I can't. And the last piece here, or the last C, but in no particular order, is compassion. And this really ties it all together. When we're compassionate, we understand that part of the human experience is suffering. That's just what it is, And if I'm suffering, other people are suffering, then I can. And the compassion actually is the willingness to alleviate the suffering of others. That's what compassion is in a nutshell. But if I can recognize that suffering in myself, if I can alleviate my own suffering with self-compassion, then how incredibly impactful am I going to be as another human being as I help other people overcome their own suffering? Because we live in this common humanity that I mentioned earlier, that we're all suffering in some way, not all the time, but there's going to be, if you're not suffering, then you're not human at all. And if you're kind of denying that you do suffer at all, then you don't know the self at all, because it's the suffering that adds character. It's the suffering that has kind of made me who I am. It's the suffering that has created the wisdom within inside of me that allows me to talk to you about the self, because I've been, I still have a long road to go. Just keep walking the path, enjoy the journey. But I'm willing to be like, okay, I'll step out. I'll do that. Like, whatever the results are, it doesn't matter, because I have the courage. I have the confidence. I have all the C's in the self lit up. I'm doing self-leadership, or I'm experiencing self-leadership. So I got this. And those are the 8 C's of the self. What I also say about the heart, and that's really the compassion does. It brings us into the heart. And when we get into the heart, then we're really into ourself. And what's really fascinating about the heart is it has its own kind of intelligence. One that is, patient and kind, loving, and, it has a natural need, the wanting to help and alleviate the suffering of others. And that's what compassion is. And, another thing I'll add, 2 things to discover more, 2 more C's actually. This is just my last 2 C's. So these are 10 C's from Will Schneider, Men Talking Mindfulness. It's change. If you want to discover more of that self, then you must change. And you must change the things that are getting in the way of you experiencing the self. You must eradicate the things in your life, or also the people in your life. Not eradicate like, take them out and eliminate them, but the things that the change is needed in order to experience change. So you might have to change some of your friendships. You might need, to get out of the living situation that you're in, or get out of some relationship that isn't working for you, and that could be the relationship with your work. If your work's holding you back, could be time for change. And the other one is the last C I'll say here, the 10th C, is challenge yourself. There's the only way you're going to know more of that self is to challenge yourself. And what do those challenges look like? What can they be? We're coming up again into 2024. Maybe we're already in 2024. How are you challenging yourself on a regular basis in order to discover more of who you are? And if you're not challenging yourself, then guess what's going to happen? You are just going to keep experiencing the same results over and over and over again. And then you're going to wonder, like, oh, why is life so shitty? You're not, you're not changing. You're not challenging yourself. You're not being courageous. You're suffering. You're not even willing to alleviate your own suffering by changing and challenging yourself. So this is why mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness, and why Men Talking Mindfulness and my incredible co-host John, we have taken up the torch together to bring more of these practices to you that can help you discover more of the self, to feel more of that self energy, to experience more of that self leadership. And sadly, most of us are tapped into a reactionary life. and we're extrinsically motivated and manipulated, by pursuing status or looking good or, giving our lives and our precious energy by trying to keep up with, the Joneses or constantly moving the goalpost, right? Everything. It's so incredibly sad how we're manipulated by the market, by media. It's really messed up. So how do we get to discover more of that self? Well, definitely change and challenge is one, and you must challenge your habits and you must begin to change your habits. And I suggest taking an inventory of what you do on a regular basis and what you do. Does it serve who you want to be? Does it serve more the self that you want to experience? And if it's not, then you must change. Getting in your body is always a great way to change. So if you're, morbidly obese or, overweight and you feel very sluggish and very tired, then I would start with your body. Get out and start taking a walk. Get out and doing something and reward the body with some physical activity and watch how the body begins to reward your mind and your feelings, and watch how you begin to naturally change by accessing your physical self on a regular basis and challenging yourself physically. Breath work. Breathing is going to help you get to that calm. It's going to help you find that connection. It's going to create that clarity, and it's going to light up the other C's in yourself, is what breathing is going to do. So get to know your breath. I say it every time. We do it every podcast. We do breathing practice because how incredibly impactful it is to the human body and the human mind. Meditate. I cannot express this enough. When you sit in meditation, and meditation is not about eliminating your thoughts. It's about observing. It's about being with what is, instead of wishing something was something, is something else. So when I sit in meditation and I just focus on my breath and just focus on the breath as it passes through my nostrils, super simple, right? Very simple practice called Anapanasati is what they teach the first 4 days of the Vipassana practice, which I've talked about as another episode. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole of discovering the self and the madness that it might take in order to access and touch that self, Vipassana meditation practice is very, very, very powerful and very profound. And it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done. It's a 10-day retreat in absolute silence, in noble silence. So therefore, there's no communication with the outside world, no writing, no reading, no even eye contact or contact with anybody else at the retreat facility. All you are is left on your own. No TV, nothing, no media, nothing. Right? It's literally you, your practice. And these practices are guided, and there's signs, and even when you're eating. How about this? When you're eating with 75 other men, and they split the men and the women, you're eating with 75 other men, and you can't even look at them when you're eating, and you're sitting right next to them. Very strange, very, very, very strange. But it's like you stay in your own lane and you do your thing. But the first 4 days, every meditation is 1 hour. 1 hour. Just imagine sitting for 1 hour meditation 10 times a day. The first 4 days, the first 30 hours of this practice, all you're doing, first 3 days, is just focusing on the breath as it passes through your nose. That's it. Anapanasati. And you're just sharpening the mind. And as you begin to sharpen the mind and draw focus away from your thinking, away from the feelings, away from the habits, away from, the typical expression of yourself, the body and the mind begin to calm down. The higher, the more higher levels of, or the most surface levels of stress and anxiety start to melt and start to go away. You begin to get deeper inside yourself. You're sharpening the mind by just focusing on, all you're doing is just focusing on the breath in your nose. That's it. Maybe it's the right nostril, or maybe it's the left nostril. Maybe it's just, both of them are flowing. One could be clogged. That doesn't matter. All you do is focus the best you can and go again and again and again and again. And you can do that practice anywhere, anytime, and it is extremely profound. And what's going to also help you find more of that self is challenging yourself. But what if you challenge yourself with some accountability? So you have these wants and desires to change and find more of the self and light up more of those 8 C's. Well, accountability could be a great ways which will help you to show up on a regular basis. It's been proven that just having an accountability partner and someone that holds you to the task that you have set forth and that you desire to complete is much better than going about any kind of change alone. So that's what I got, guys. I really appreciate you checking this Know Thyself Microdose out. Stay connected to Men Talking Mindfulness. We are going to have a big year in 2024. We're going to be offering a lot more group classes and ways to connect to other members in our community and ways to practice with members of our community. So thanks for being part of this journey with us. Let us know how we can help you have an easier journey. We have a retreat in May, 16th to the 19th at a castle, Glen, Eyrie Castle in Colorado Springs. So maybe you want to join us for that. You can check out mentalkingmindfulness.com/retreat. And thank you, everybody. We appreciate you for tuning in. Leave us a review. Give me, let me know. Send me a DM on Instagram at mentalkingmindfulness.com. Or you can also hit me up on my own personal Instagram is willnotfear.com. And John is Mindful Frogman is his Instagram handle. And hey, we really appreciate you guys tuning in, helping us grow the show. We have a 7th season going into our 8th season. We have a legit successful show. And we're going to be bringing more of you this content as we continually go through. And much love to you guys. Have a great holiday if this hit you before then. I hope you guys are having a great year before that. And much love. Keep rocking. Peace.